name is Cecil Glass, and I served in the Navy during the Second World War and in Korea, and I'm 90 years old.
Paul Fouts, F-O-U-T-S, so you get it right. I served in the Second World War in the 92nd Infantry Division. I am 100 years old plus 8 months.
My name is J.S. Fichtner. I'm 91, and I served in the Navy in both the World War II and the Korean War.
In 1941, December 7th, I was having lunch at home. We'd invited a couple of friends of ours that were both single, trying to get them together. And the news came over the radio. And we were sitting at a dining room table. When the news first came over the radio, we couldn't believe it. But of course, we all got up, four of us got up and went, sat around the radio, listened to the news coming in.
It was a Sunday, December 7th, 1941, and I don't have any recollection of that day at all. I remember the following day. I was in high school, and I remember that all the young men, I being one of them, wanted to go out and fight, join up. And I remember the teacher's name, Miss Cheney, who was our French teacher, said we couldn't do that we had to go ahead and get our education. And so I was, during the first 2 years of the war, I was in high school. I was in the Victory Corps, which is a local outfit, where we were making sure windows were closed and shades were pulled and things like that. I think, to me, as I sit here today, my life went on as if nothing had happened, I guess. I'm sure that, at the time, things were happening, and I was obviously exposed to the news that was coming in, but I have no specific recollection of it. What about you, Cecil? Do you remember?
Well, not too well, but I was in high school also.
Yeah.
And, I guess I must have been in my junior year when it...
Yeah, both. I was in my junior year too.
And then, of course, the next year I graduated and went off to college. But all I remember about December the 7th is riding my bicycle over to a friend's house, and when I got there, I found out about it.
I volunteered for service toward the end of my high school, and I went off to college by Uncle Sam's expense.
That's what I did.
Yeah. I was in the V-12 program.
Well, so was I.
The V-12 program was for the purpose of training officers in the Navy and deck officers. And so it's really ironic. I went to Harvard for the first couple of year or two, and then things changed, and I was put in the fleet. But those were strange. It was a team effort, just like we have team efforts in football and baseball.
I thought, well, this war is going on. I'm going to go and learn how to fly an airplane, have that there thing wrapped around my neck, flying wind, shooting down Germans. So I was managing a jewelry store in Youngstown, Ohio. So I took train up to Cleveland and took the aptitude test, passed that, and that was on a Monday, and had to go back up Friday for the physical. Well, got along fine until they come to the eyes, and I kept making 2 mistakes on the eye chart. And he said the doctor was a civilian, and he says, Paul, I see you're from Youngstown, Ohio. He says, do you happen to know Buck Porter by any chance? I said, yeah, I know Buck real well. He worked for me before he went to the Air Force. Have you heard from him since he went in? I said, yeah, the last I heard he was in Santa Ana, California. He said, let's try it again. Took the test again, made 2 mistakes. He says, do you know Earl Strom? I said, Earl is working for me now. This is really coincidence. And so he said, well, Paul, about that time, a buck sergeant opened the door. He said, hey, Doc, we got a lineup out here. We got to move. We can't stay here forever. So he said to me, he said, well, Paul, he says, I can pass you, but you'll never fly. You'll be in the ground crew. I said, no, that's not for me. So I went home, and they weren't drafting families with, if they had a child. Well, I had a 4-month-old child, and I could have taken that as a stay-at-home deal, but I kind of wanted to go. I thought it'd be a big adventure. I didn't know what I was getting my neck into. But anyway, shortly after that, Uncle Sam sent me a notice. They were going to draft me. They thought I was gung-ho because I'd tried to enter the Air Force. And so I decided I'd go ahead and go. My wife said it'd be all right. Incidentally, everybody almost worked for the war effort back in those days. My wife worked in a steel mill. And so I left, but they said to me, Paul, your IQ test you took when getting your eye test was quite high. He says, you're eligible to go to OCS Fort Benning. And I said, well, that's great. I'd like to start out as a general. It wasn't quite a general. But anyway, when it come right down to nuts and bolts, they hadn't killed enough second lieutenants. Lieutenants were known to be expendable. And they had stopped taking applicants for lieutenants at Fort Benning. So they assigned me to the 87th Infantry Division. And I trained with them all through up. We ended up on maneuvers in mountains of Tennessee, 6, 8 inches of snow. And it was tactical situations. We had 4 or 5 of us scrape the snow away, we had our raincoats, that's all we had. Put our raincoats down, the rest of us piled in all together, piled in that hole we had made in the snow. And when things got back to normal, I was acting as a lieutenant all the time. They knew I was going to go to OCS as soon as it opened, so they treated me as if I had a platoon that I was leader of, just as I would have if I had the commission. And one day we were given a problem, and so after we finished, while we were sitting under a bunch of shade trees, critiquing what we did right, what we did wrong with the problem, I looked out, and here comes a bird colonel walking across the field. So I go out to him and salute him, and he says, Paul, he says, turn that a bunch of yours over to the sergeant. We're going to go in. He says, you're going to OCS. You got to get ready to go down to Fort Benning. I said, this is something that happened prior to that. I said, no, I'm not eligible. You got to be a corporal, at least to go to OCS. He says, you're a corporal right now.
What was it that drew everybody in?
It was the pictures of the raid on Pearl Harbor. For me, that
Did Roosevelt have to sell this war?
Oh, no. No,
No,
I mean,
not-
it was
not
his
after
famous
Pearl Harbor.
speech.
No, that Pearl Harbor, I would say that really sent it home. You know, that wasn't any. When that happened, well, I mean that cemented it.
And we were living our lives. We were growing up. We were 16, 15, 16 years old. And we all wanted to get into the service. You know, I had to travel. We lived in a suburb of New York, in Mount Vernon. And I had to go down to Manhattan to go to the Navy, to volunteer and take courses, take tests, like Paul has mentioned. But we were living our lives on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's what happens.
Of course, everybody thought Roosevelt was God. You know,
That's right.
he was very popular, and you couldn't imagine you'd ask without him as president. I don't think. And, of course, Stalin was one of the bad guys, and of course Churchill was one of the good guys. So I don't know. I volunteered, went into the Navy in April of 1944, and I was a student at Texas University, and I knew, you know, when I turned 18, I was going to get drafted, and so I took the V-12 exam and passed it, and I went down to San Antonio and got sworn in, and 1st of May I became a sailor.
Right.
That was 44, and so I continued on there until May of, I guess, 1945, and they said, that's all you're going to get. You're going to medical school. You're done. I didn't get a degree. They just, you know, at that time So I went up to Norman, Oklahoma, and spent about 3.5 months being a hospital corpsman until the medical school class started in September. And then I went to the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston.
When you're in the service,
Yeah,
they say go here and you get on an airplane or you get on a train. I remember trains with square wheels. Whatever they could put together, they sent you off, and you went.
well, yeah, you obeyed orders. But I went to, initially I went to Mare Island Naval Shipyard at the Naval Dispensary. And I spent, maybe 4 weeks or a month or something there. And then I got high priority orders to report to the Commandant in San Francisco. And I had 24 hours to wrap up all of my personal doings and report to go to Japan. So that's what I did, and they flew us to Japan, and they put me on what was called Surgical Team Number 2, and attached us to the 1st Marine Division, and so we got ready and went to Incheon and made an amphibious landing. Took Kempo Airfield, then we took Seoul. Then they put us on ships and sent us around the south end, and we were going up the east coast to make another invasion. And we got up there, and it was too heavily mined, and so we had to wait and sail up and down, wait for them to clear the mines. And by the time that happened, well, Bob Hope was already at the place giving a show. So the Army had raced up and taken it all before we could get there. I was on an LST, and we had a boatload of Marines, a lot of them who had never been trained because they joined the reserve in the Los Angeles area to get the initial payment and the money, and then they never showed up for any more. And when the war started, they went out and rounded a bunch of them up, and so they were training them on the ship as we were going. The reason that they did, and Incheon was an interesting place. It had a 27-foot tide, and of course we went in at high tide. Well, the tide went out, and there was nothing but mud as far as you could see out toward the channel, or out where the. I got up the next morning. I didn't get up. We never went to bed or anything, but I went out the next morning on the fantail and looked out, and man, there was mud. You couldn't see any ship until you were way out in the.
Yeah.
It was kind of like MASH.
Yeah. Mm.
And we had helicopters bringing patients in, and we weren't actually, you know, as a medical officer, you weren't in combat, but you were right behind the combat because you were going
Yeah, yeah.
where the casualties were.
When they as we was loading the ship, back in those days they had telegrams, and got a telegram for a Lieutenant Johnson. Well, he was one of the fellows that just graduated OCS. He'd become a father, and he had that telegram. And then when we landed, we were assigned the outfits we were going to be with, and he was on the way up the hill with a corporal to replace a sergeant that had replaced the lieutenant that was killed, and he was killed on the way up that hill. And I had a good friend that went through OCS with me. He went out on a combat patrol, himself and 42 men. He came back about an hour later with himself and 2 men. And we got to talking. We were the whole company was in a bombed out building in a cellar. And we got talking. He says, Paul, he says, I never thought I could be scared, but he says, I've been scared to death. He says, I feel like shooting myself in the hand or in the leg. Get out of this. So about that time they called Lieutenant Fouts. Oh boy, I was a little nervous there. Well, they wanted me to go out on a reconnaissance patrol up to this little town nestled between 2 hills in the valley, to see if they had pulled out after that or not. They had set a trap for this combat patrol. So I took 2 men and myself, and we were walking up the middle of that road. I remember it was a bright moonlit night, almost like daylight, and we were afraid of mines being on the side of the road, so we were on this cement road. And we come to where bodies strewn around, guns all over the place and all. We got into the center of the town, and I told I said, each one of you now pick out a building, fire a clip of ammunition, and get out of here. So on the way back, we each picked up as many weapons as we could carry, and went back, and let's see. Oh yeah, then I asked one of the fellows where this other officer was that had the combat patrol, and unfortunately his rifle had went off and a bullet went through the palm of his hand. He was in the hospital, which would have, if they could have proven and had time to prove it, that he'd done it to himself, he would have been shot for cowardice in combat. And that was the last real action that we really had. We were in a sort of a stalemate at the Shenquali Canal for about 6 months. And we'd go out on patrols at night, and you'd carry your rifle up over your head and wade through this canal to the other side, and lay there. In the wintertime, we'd lay there for about 15, 20 minutes. The clothes would freeze on you. And then it was difficult to get back in your own lines because they had a password to get in, so you get back into your own lines. We were told to act natural, keep the formations, do what we do every day, because there were spies. Some of those Italians, living there, you couldn't tell them they were spies. And so we wanted everything. We didn't want them to know when we were going to start the attack. Well, when the attack started, the captain of the company, Captain Dowdy, was assigned to go down to the, I forget this resort down the tip of Italy. And I was to go to Rome. Well, he asked me, Paul, he says, I have a friend in Rome I'd like to see. How about switching with me? So we did. I went, and I had to use a general's plane. They flew me down there. And when they did break out and start the battle, why, he was close by and they knew where he was, and they pulled him back in, and he was killed. First day of combat.
Well, I think they called it shell shock.
Well, that was the First World War. Was shell
That was
shock.
a different word, and the intricacies of PTSD, they didn't know about them at that, really didn't know about. They just knew that these folks froze up or something would happen.
Well, I'll tell you this. If anybody that was in combat tells you they weren't scared, they're liars. They were scared. I was scared. Well, Mussolini, see, there's 4 or 5 versions the way they were killed, but they're all wrong because I was there. Another officer and myself were on a 10-day rest leave up at Lake, what's the name of that lake?
Como?
No, place, Como is one of the series of lakes there. But anyway, we were on a 10-day break there, so it's about 5 or 6 miles to Switzerland. So I said, let's go up to Switzerland and say we've been in Switzerland, have a snowball fight. So we was going through this little town, there was a crowd of people, the town was packed, so we parked and went over. Here's Mussolini, his girlfriend, first lieutenant, and 5 bodyguards hanging by their feet from a girder, from an old abandoned garage or something. And I didn't know it, but my friend, he had a camera and took pictures and had a set made for me too. But he was killed trying to escape to Switzerland. They knew the war was winding down. And as a consequence, he wanted to escape because he knew that he'd be hung by a jury or shot, one or the other. And they got caught. And the partisans, the Italian partisans. Now the partisans, Italy, most people in Italy believed they were on the wrong side. Almost every one of them had relatives in the United States. They thought they should be on this side, so they formed a group of partisans. Well, they knew the territory, knew where the mines were planted and the trails and things like that. And we used them all the time when we went out on patrols. And that night, that was April 28th, 1945. That night, they cut them down, took them into, what's the name of that big northern Italy town? Anyway, they took them in there, and the next morning, they hung them up on meat hooks.
I think that Truman did the right thing dropping the bomb.
Yes.
It ended the war. And as like he says, you know, we would probably have lost several 100,000 men.
I'll tell you, I never expected to come home. We landed in Italy, and I talked to some of those fellows working on the dock. I've been over there 4 years. I knew I couldn't. And when I got to my outfit that I was going to be with, I was up on a hill waiting in the headquarters company for daylight, and they'd take me to my outfit. Looking down in the valley, I seen these shells. You can see the red trail going back and by. I says, Paul, what the hell have you got yourself into now? And I knew I was in trouble.